I want to begin in Concord, New Hampshire this hour for more testimony. In the broken trust abuse trial, 62-year-old Victor Malavet is facing more than a dozen charges of aggravated sexual assault. This is dating back to 2001 at a juvenile detention facility where he worked as a counselor. Natasha Maunsell was 15 years old when she was housed at that youth detention services unit, and she claims that he raped her multiple times between April and December of 2001. Maunsell took the witness stand earlier this week to recall telling her dad about the abuse. Let's listen.
Natasha, do you recall who was the first person that you had told about something happening with the defendant?
Yes, throughout the years afterwards, I had written it in a journal, notated it, marked it in a journal of a timeline that I did. I had a conversation with my dad about it, but the first time I had actually really told to anybody what happened, because the first time that I had mentioned it to my dad, I had just, I told him, I said, do you remember the investigation? And
Natasha, at this point, and I'll rephrase, Judge.
All right.
Natasha, without getting into what you may have said to your dad, did you have a conversation with him?
yes.
And do you recall about when that would have taken place?
Between many years ago.
Okay. And Natasha, do you have, or have you been convicted of a felony before?
Yes.
And was that in 2004?
Yes.
And were there 3 felonies?
Yes.
Was it around that time frame that you had a conversation with your father?
Objection, leaving, Your Honor.
I can rephrase.
Overruled.
Thank you, Judge. Do you recall about the time frame it was that you spoke with your father?
I had mentioned it. I had made something had happened that triggered the memory of that incident, of the investigation, and I just basically told him, I said, do you remember the investigation? And I said, well...
And Natasha, without getting into what specifically was said.
Okay,
So
okay.
There are just rules about what people can say. Do you just remember the time frame? That's what I'm trying to understand. Do you remember the time frame?
No.
Okay. Now, you had also started to testify about the fact that there was someone that you had spoken to, and it sounded like an investigation. Do you remember that?
I remember, yes.
And what is it that you remember? Who came to speak with you?
I didn't know until just recently, but when there was an investigation, I had believed that it was 2 detectives from the Manchester Police Department.
Okay, so at the time you thought they were 2 police officers from Manchester Police Department?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall whether those were recorded conversations?
It was video recorded.
It was video recorded?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember, were you still at YDSU at that time?
Yes.
Was the defendant still working at YDSU at that time?
At the time of the investigation, not anymore. Well, not, it was suspended.
Okay, so at some point, he's no longer there?
Yes.
Okay. Now, while you were having that discussion with who you thought were 2 police detectives, what were you thinking at the time?
I was scared. I didn't know. I started to fear authority. I started to fear that I could trust authority. So when they asked me, I was afraid because I was still there. I would stayed there until I was 17, which would have been almost another year. And so I was afraid of what might happen to me if I had told on their staff and told them what happened to me and what was happening to me and what Victor had done to me. And so I had lied to them. And I said that Victor was a Christian brother, someone that friends that I looked up to as a mentor. And they asked me multiple questions, and in the end, afterwards, after they...
And Natasha, let me interrupt you. Do you remember what happened after they spoke with you?
Yes.
After those individuals spoke with you, did you see the defendant again?
Yes.
I would like to welcome our guest for this hour, trial and family law attorney Michelle Thomas. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us this hour. All right, we're listening to the alleged victim's testimony here, and what an awful predicament she's describing. Here she is being housed at the juvenile detention facility. She's going to be there for another year. She's being asked by the prosecutor about why she really wasn't forthcoming with things. Obviously, she's going to be ripped apart on this on defense. Defense counsel will tread lightly here. But what a bad situation. I was even reading how staff at this facility was told not to take the word of the children there over the word of the employees. So even if they were talking about a conversation she had with her father, if her father would have come to the detention facility and made some remarks about some alleged abuse, who knows what could really happen to his daughter?
Yeah, good afternoon, Kelly, and thanks for having me. This is such a tragic story that we're hearing from this witness. First of all, you can tell that she's been traumatized, and she testified to having already been traumatized at the point that she entered the juvenile detention facility. So we have to remember that this is a young person who had already had a host of personal problems and troubles growing up. That's why presumably she ended up there. So you have someone who's already been traumatized, and then to rely and begin to build a trust with someone who's responsible for you at the center. To the extent that these allegations are true, certainly it's problematic, and I think anyone should be able to understand, the jury should be able to understand why she may not have been forthcoming initially, why she may not have taken the steps that you would otherwise think would have normally been taken. With respect to her father, again, because she was at the facility, there may have already been other issues there, or issues with her father as to why he didn't come forward. And so to think that there is a policy, or was a policy in place that says don't believe the children, particularly if there's several of them who are sort of alleging the same thing, that is problematic. Of course, this defendant is innocent until proven guilty, but we have a situation here where she sounds quite credible to me. The way that she's telling the story in such detail, you can tell that she's affected by it. The way that she's telling the story, trying to maintain her composure as she relives these horrible experiences from her teen years. So this is a really difficult, I think, situation. It will be difficult for the defense to cross-examine her without turning others off.
And Michelle, we're hearing Natasha talk about the investigation. She's trying to say that, and then there's getting an objection to that. I'm assuming there was some sort of motion in limine in which they cannot talk about this investigation, in which more than 1,000 people in the state of New Hampshire have come forward alleging abuse at the hands of the state in these facilities. So it appears that they don't want her to be talking about that. So I'm assuming some pretrial motions that she's not supposed to be talking about that, clearly.
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right, Kelly. I believe there's been an alleged 1,100 victims by these juvenile detention facilities. and which indicates that there has been a systemic problem here. And to the extent that the policies were not to believe the children or to sort of minimize their stories or their concerns or their complaints, this is perhaps the end result. But certainly you can understand why there was probably a preliminary motion, as you said, or a motion in limine where the court determined that these other acts or incidences or other victims cannot be brought in, because you don't want to suggest that because of the other 1,100 people who may have suffered the same fate, that means that this defendant also imposed the same type of harm and trauma on this particular witness. So that's understandable, but clearly there was a systemic problem in that jurisdiction.
Absolutely. Michelle, thank you so much. We're going to get in a quick break. And coming up after the break, we're going to hear the rest of Natasha Maunsell's direct examination and then the cross-examination by Victor Malavet's defense team. We'll be right back.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, an accused quadruple murderer, Brian Kohberger, returns to the courtroom. What this hearing means for the trial slated to begin in the summer.
Closing Arguments tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
We are getting you caught up on key testimony in the broken trust abuse trial this afternoon. Then 15-year-old Natasha Maunsell claims that she was repeatedly raped by a counselor at the juvenile detention facility where she was staying at the time. 62-year-old Victor Malavet is now facing more than a dozen charges of aggravated sexual assault dating back to 2001. Earlier this week, Maunsell took the stand to explain why she waited so long to report this abuse. Take a listen.
Many years later, did you decide to speak with law enforcement?
Yes, I did.
And do you recall speaking with law enforcement around 2020?
Yes, February.
And do you remember what agency or who came to speak with you?
The state police.
And around that same time, Natasha, did you also file a civil lawsuit?
Yes.
Did that civil lawsuit, was that against the Department of Health and Human Services
Yes.
and other people?
Yes.
What is your understanding of the status of that lawsuit?
Pending. It's currently pending, waiting trial.
Okay. Awaiting trial. As part of your civil lawsuit, did you receive any financial compensation?
Not as of yet, no.
Okay. Have you received any money from a company named Universal Funds?
Yes.
What is your understanding of what Universal Funds is?
Universal Funds is a company that advances loans to you before a lawsuit. So they have an underwriter who reads your case, your
Sustained.
Natasha, without getting into the process, just what is your understanding of what Universal Funds is?
Pre-settlement funding.
Okay. And did you receive money as pre-settlement funding?
Yes.
Has that been over the course of years?
Yes.
Do you recall how much money you've received from Universal Funds?
Approximately $150,000. Yes.
And what did you do with that money? Or what were you required to do with that money?
I had paid all of my bills, rent. I was providing only for myself, and I had 2 children, and so I had done a lot. I had been able to create a home for them in an apartment. Each of my children had their own room, and they were able to have provided for every time a season would come. You know, they would have clothes that would fit them, and what else have I done? All the furniture in my home. I had a vehicle. I don't have it no longer, but I had a vehicle that the advances had helped me make payments for. I had some debt. That's
Now, Natasha, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt
just bills and essentials, really.
Okay. Now, your agreement with Universal Funds, does that require you to participate in a criminal case?
No.
Is your civil case separate from this proceeding that you're here for?
Completely.
Your Honor, if I may just have one moment.
You may.
Do you recognize?
Yes.
Who is that?
Me.
Do you remember about how old you were in that photo?
Very young. 15. Maybe 16.
Was that when you were at YSU?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because I can see the chairs and the windows in my uniform.
Your Honor, I would move to strike the ID of this and move it as a full exhibit.
Any objection?
Your Honor.
All right, it shall be entered as a full exhibit. That states number 7.
Thank you, Judge. Natasha, I want to show you states 9 for ID. I want you to look at that. Tell me if you recognize what that is.
This was a journal that I kept when I was involved in a program that I was doing just to work through trauma and stuff.
Okay. Can you open it and just make sure that it is right?
Yes.
Okay, is this one page?
Yes.
Journal? Is this the timeline that you had told the jurors about when you were testifying?
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to show you states 9A for ID. Is this just that timeline?
Yes.
But are there redactions on it?
Yes.
Okay.
Same timeline.
And is this, in fact, your journal?
Yes.
That you wrote?
Yes.
Natasha, the things that you spoke about today to the jurors happened many, many years ago. Why did you decide to come forward all these years later?
There was someone on my Facebook page who had been in YDC with me, and I didn't remember him, but he had reached out to me and asked me if anything. So he had reached out to me.
And based off of that communication, what did you do?
I had reached out to the attorney that he had wanted to give me the number of.
Okay. And then did you speak or agree to speak with state police
Yes,
about all the things that had happened to you back
Yes.
in 2001?
I did.
Earlier in your testimony, I had asked you questions about your convictions. Were you convicted of 2 counts of first-degree assault
Yes,
of staff members at YDC in Manchester?
yes,
And were those charges the reason that you were at YDSU in April of 2001?
yes,
you testified on direct that you spoke with Mr. Malavet as soon as you arrived at YDSU the second time.
Yes.
But you had previously known Mr. Malavet
Yes.
from your first stay at YDSU.
Yes.
And you had interacted normally with him then?
I don't clearly remember my interactions with him before April.
Okay, but you did certainly know him.
Yes, I knew he was a staff member. I was familiar with him when I went back in April, yes.
All right, and so when you were at YDSU the second time, that was after the assault at YDC.
Yes.
And to be clear, that assault was on, well, it was 2 assaults, right?
Yes.
Both on 2 different staff members. Is that correct?
Yes.
With a lead pipe
Yes.
over their heads.
Yes.
And the third charge was an escape.
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, may we approach?
The jury shall disregard any mention of an escape charge.
That conversation that he had with you, what he was saying to you was, what happened to you? He asked you, what happened to you? Is that right?
Yes.
He said, this isn't the same Natasha that was here last time.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Sustained.
So you testified that when you first arrived that you were really scared.
Yes.
And so a lot of that fear wasn't just because of the place you were in, right?
It was a combination of things, yes.
Of the place you were in and your future. Is that fair?
I felt a lot of fear about my future, yes. About my my life, about being back in the juvenile facilities.
You testified today that it was approximately 1 month after you arrived that that your allegations first took place?
It was around the time when I first started earning good behavior to stay out longer.
But today you testified that it was about a month in.
It was, yes, about, I remember it being about a month in. It could have been longer, could have been shorter. I remember it being about a month in.
So you arrived in April, right? April
Yes.
12th, is that right? Does that sound right?
11th.
11th, April 11th. And you said it was about a month in.
Yes.
You have previously, as you talked about on direct, you've talked to a few people now about these allegations.
Yes.
And you spoke with, I believe, a prosecutor and an investigator on July 8th of 2020.
Yes.
And while you were speaking to them, you indicated that it was about 2 months in.
Okay.
Is that right?
I don't know the exact time frame, 1 month or 2 months. I don't remember. I just know the time frame that it was when I was starting to get good behavior and
Okay.
stay out later.
When you spoke to those people on July 8th of 2020, you indicated that you felt pretty strongly that it was about 2 months. Is that right?
Yes.
That it didn't begin until June.
If that's what I said then that's what I would have remembered at that moment, yes.
All right. So listen, I don't want to put words in your mouth, and I don't want, it's not my word. So if you will give me just one moment, I'm going to give you a copy of that transcript, okay?
Sure.
You were talking to the officer, and we'll go back to page 4 so that you can see that it was you speaking. Okay. And you told the officer that you believed it was either June to November or November to June. Right?
Correct.
And then on page 55.
Thank you.
You're talking with the trooper, talking about when your birthday is, and you confirm that it was in fact June to November.
Yes.
So you would have been 16. Is that correct?
So I would have been 16 at June, yes. And that is what I had told them, but it is more accurate if the documents of the charts of when I was on good behavior, that's when I would have, that's the best way to really know.
We'd understand.
I don't have a clear memory exactly if it was 1 month or if it was 2 months or if it was a month and a half right in between. But it was only after I had to work up to get, and it may have taken 30 days or 60 days to work up to good behavior to stay out.
Okay. So, before you spoke to them in July of 2020, the first time you reported that you had been sexually abused was on February 19th of 2020.
Yes.
And it was the first time that you spoke with an attorney.
Yes.
That's Russ Riley,
Correct.
who represents you in your civil suit.
Correct.
You didn't make any allegations when you were asked in January of 2002.
Was that the interview with the two gentlemen when I was in the education wing at YDSU?
Well, you actually spoke with a couple different people. Do you recall you spoke with a Jennifer Boyce? She was an ombudsman.
I don't recall.
Okay, so we'll go back to that. But the two gentlemen you spoke to, you definitely didn't tell them.
Correct.
And you testified that, well, let me ask you this. You didn't make any allegations on February 8th of 2002 when you met with a Dr. Mart?
Correct.
That was a psychologist?
Yes.
You testified that you were scared of what might happen to you at YDSU.
Yes.
However, you aged out in May of 2002, correct?
Yes.
You testified that you were released the night before your birthday?
Yes.
The day before? And you knew that you could not be sent back to YDSU.
Correct.
So at that point, you still didn't make any allegations.
Correct.
All right, listening to the cross-examination of the alleged victim in this case, we're going to get in a quick break, but when we come back, we'll hear more of the cross-examination. Stay with us.
In the world of true crime, the path from victim to verdict is never a straight line. Join me for a Court TV original series that takes you through every dark twist and turn, from the crime scene to the courtroom, in America's most compelling cases.
She killed my daughter, and he marries her.
Victim to Verdict with Ted Rollins, a Court TV original series. New season premieres September 8th.
Only on Court TV.
Let's get back to New Hampshire for testimony in the broken trust abuse trial of defendant Victor Malavet. The youth detention counselor is charged with raping 15-year-old Natasha Maunsell. She is now 39 years old and testified against him on the second day of the trial. We are picking it up her testimony right now on cross-examination, explaining to the defense why she did not report the allegations against her client sooner.
When you were released, you had actually gone home.
Yes, for a week, and then I was sent to Valley Street Jail for pretrial for about 6 months, right after I turned 17.
Okay. And after those 6 months, though, you were out on bail and in the community for 15 months.
Yes.
And you didn't tell anyone then? You didn't report the allegations?
I did not, no.
Now, you were specifically asked some questions in June of 2017. You were asked very specifically if you had experienced sexual assault while in confinement.
Yes.
And you answered no.
What document, who was the source of that question? What was that?
You testified on direct about the layout of YDSU.
Yes.
And I have a copy of the state's Exhibit 8. And I'm going to approach you with another copy of that, okay?
Sure.
So I'm handing you State's Exhibit 8, right?
Yes.
And I have, and this looks like a copy of that document?
Yes.
Okay. So this is sort of odd. You had pointed out earlier on the projector where the laundry room was. Okay. And where is the day room?
Right here. That was the part that I had mentioned was kind of disproportionate.
Okay.
Because it would stick out and run rectangularly down.
So do me a favor here.
Sure.
I have a pen. I'm handing you a pen. So this is on our own copy. Okay. Just draw the day room then. All right. And right here you have a little door.
Yes.
Is that what that line is right there?
Yes.
Can you do me a favor? Can you just highlight that in purple and just write door? And then can you point out the laundry room again?
Right here.
Right there. Okay. And that laundry room also has a door.
Yes.
Can you outline that there? You don't have to write door on that one.
Right here.
Can you just draw a line of the path that you would take in order to go from the day room into the laundry room?
Yes.
So you would essentially have to turn 2 corners.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I can take that back.
Sure.
Your Honor, if I may have permission to publish to the jury, or I can mark it first.
Can you show the state first?
I want to talk a little bit about how things were set into motion in terms of your civil suit. Okay?
Okay.
So at some point you received a message over, was it Facebook Messenger?
Yes.
And that was from a friend?
No, someone that I had known who I was previously in YDC with.
Okay, so not a friend?
No.
All right, so an acquaintance from YDC reaches out to you.
Yes.
And they send you a message.
Yes.
And at first you ignore that message. Is that right?
Okay.
Is that correct?
I don't remember saying, if I did, I'd do that a lot. So yes, I'm probably sure that's right.
Okay. So at some point, eventually, you actually engage in a conversation with that person.
Yes.
and you learn about the lawsuit against YDC.
Yes, he asked, no, I didn't yet. He asked me if anything had ever happened to me. I didn't have a long conversation with him at all, because that was the main reason why he was reaching out to me, was to ask me if anything had ever happened while I was in the juvenile, in YDC.
So your testimony is that they didn't first ask you if you knew what was going on with YDC?
Correct.
Okay. So, again, we talked about that first conversation you had with officers, and that was on July 9th of 2020?
Yes.
All right. You'd agree that at that time, the conversation you had with this person would have been fresher in your memory?
At that time, yes, because it was closer.
So, I'm going to show you page 91 of that third transcript. So, directing you to lines, starting at line 14, you say that he sent you a message, and at first you ignored it, right? And he said something about, do you know what's going on in YDC or with YDC?
Okay.
And you ignored the message for a while. And then at some point you get back in contact with him. He reaches out to you a second time, essentially. And you, at that time, looked up the message and you found it, the original message. And it wasn't until after that point that he asks you if anything had happened at YDC.
Yeah, he had, what I remember is receiving a text from him in that same conversation that he had definitely. Can you tell me what the date was that when I had first, it was in February, it was the same few days or same day as February 19th, 2020, when I had first reported it to Russ Riley.
All right, and so on the 19th of February, you hire Russ Riley.
Yes.
And now Russ Riley assisted you in suing YDSCO.
Russ Riley represents me on a civil case, yes.
Against YDSCO?
Against YDSU, against a lot of individuals and entities, yes.
Including Victor Malavet personally?
Yes.
And you'd agree that there is money to gain in a civil suit?
There is monetary compensation for damages.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the different allegations you have in there.
Okay.
One allegation you have is that they did not provide you an education.
Are you speaking about the master complaint that is filed on my behalf of the lawsuit in the civil matter?
Your lawsuit does include an allegation that you did not receive an education.
The master complaint is a general master complaint that they filed when they I'm not an attorney, so I just have a lawsuit that those were not specific allegations that I had. Well, is the question if I was denied education?
Can I have counsel approach, please?
You would agree that over the years you have received information about your case from other sources?
Yes.
In terms of Victor's duties, he was just a general staff member.
Yes.
So he didn't have authority over other staff members.
Correct.
He just oversaw the general function of what was happening, of the kids?
He had his specific role as there was a staff assigned whether it switches throughout the shift or not, I don't remember, but one that's in the bubble, kind of seeing everything that's going around, and then another or two are in the day room for the period of time, and that's where they stay, you know, throughout their shift.
You've previously described his job as just a babysitter.
Well, if you were a babysitter, no. I mean, in a sense, they do. We're not, you know. I mean, they watch us, but they tell us a babysitter is not an authority figure that has control over your life, and when you can.
So you disagree?
Move to the next seat.
Oh, I thought you were done. I apologize.
It's okay.
So you disagree that you've called him a babysitter?
I described his position. It may have been a trail. I believe when I said it, it was a trail off chuckle, in a way of describing. But yes, it was not a daycare. However, he didn't have a uniform on, so I may have used that term, but it wasn't used. It's not lightly, as far as.
So previously, I'm looking at the third transcript, page 6, line 20. You said he just oversaw the function of the kids, really. And then Trooper says, mm-hmm. And then you said he, for the lack of a better explanation, he was a babysitter.
Yes.
He was there to make sure that there wasn't any violence.
He was a babysitter with a lot of control.
You say that he had a lot of control, but you didn't even know if Victor did behavioral reports.
I did.
You did know that?
Can you explain that behavioral report? Are you talking about the scoring at the end of the week?
Victor has never threatened you.
No.
And he's never threatened you, even in terms of the power he had over you at YDSU.
He never verbally threatened me. No.
Are you saying he physically threatened you?
Well, I felt very threatened in the candy room the first time. He had pushed my head down to give him oral sex. I felt very.
Outside of your very specific allegations, he never verbally or physically threatened you?
No.
You talked about how you progressed in your behavior over time? A little bit?
I was healing.
Okay.
I was searching for purpose. So in that, I had examined myself a lot during that time. And I had started to change my behaviors as a person. So it reflected in being a volunteer and just doing positive things.
Okay. When you were spoken to in 2002, and I know you don't remember your conversation with Ombudsman Boyce, but you do recall your conversation with the two officers.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And during those conversations, they asked you some very specific questions.
Yes.
But they also asked you some bigger, broader questions.
Yes.
Right? Such as whether you felt safe. Is that right?
Yes.
Whether you felt comfortable.
I don't remember those questions. If I was assuming that you were reading that from his transcript, and so if that's what one of the questions were, then I don't recall being asked if I felt safe. I may have.
So Jennifer Boyce, she told you that she was there to make sure that you weren't being neglected or abused, right? That's on page 2, line 11.
Okay. It says, and to make sure you haven't been abused and neglected while you've been in one of these institutions that is run by Juvenile Justice Service because you are a minor in a juvenile.
She also told you that other staff wasn't going to see that interview. That's on page 3, line 7.
He said if it ever went to court, maybe a judge might see it, or if the police get involved in an investigation, maybe the police.
She also tells you that you're not going to get in trouble.
She said, I'm not here to get you in trouble.
She told you that whatever you told her would be confidential, that she wouldn't tell the direct staff that worked there. Is that right?
That's what it says, yes.
And at one point, she specifically asks you if you and Victor had ever kissed. You denied that. Is that fair?
Yes.
And even after that, she reminded you that you would not be in trouble even after you denied the kiss. That's page 7, line 4, if you want to look at it.
Said like I am. Okay.
And I won't make you read through the whole transcript, but she goes through and she tries to make you feel safe several times. Would you agree with that? You can look at page 8. It has a big chunk.
I was very defensive in this interview. I can feel the fear that I felt behind why.
So it sounds like you're starting to remember this first interview?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
The remainder of Maunsell's cross-examination, we'll be back with that coming up.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, an accused quadruple murderer, Brian Kohberger, returns to the courtroom. What this hearing means for the trial slated to begin in the summer.
Closing Arguments tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
Friday nights, the WNBA is on Ion. This week, the Indiana Fever head to Chicago to take on the Sky, followed by a showdown in Seattle, where the Storm face the New York Liberty. Coverage starts Friday night at 7. Check local listings for games in your area. Ion, it's on.
We are getting you caught up on key testimony in the broken trust abuse trial going on this afternoon.
Then 15-year-old Natasha Maunsell claims that she was repeatedly raped by a counselor at the juvenile detention facility where she was staying at the time.
62-year-old Victor Malavet is now facing more than a dozen charges of aggravated sexual assault dating back to 2001 as a result.
Earlier this week, the defense questioned Maunsell on why it took her nearly 20 years to report the abuse. Let's take a listen.
It was communicated to you that it was a pretty serious situation.
I was terrified. I was terrified when I'm brought into in this. I can feel my fear and my terror, and I'm back to being that girl again. And I remember being terrified of repercussions of if I were to say what was happening to me.
So are you telling me that you do remember this conversation now?
I remember the interview with the two gentlemen. I don't remember the interview here with Jennifer, no.
So you don't remember the interview here. So you don't, okay, you don't remember this interview. Nonetheless, in this interview, you told Miss Boyce that you felt safe.
Can you show me where?
Sure. So we're looking at page 19.
I couldn't hear that.
Objection, hearsay. She's asking what this witness told.
Sustained.
Your Honor, it's impeachment. She just said that she was scared, but she was saying...
Can I have counsel approach the bench?
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your dad. Okay?
Okay.
You have a really good relationship with him?
Very good.
And your dad has been there for you?
He's my rock.
And obviously he loves you?
Very much.
And when you found yourself in really difficult situations, it was your dad that you were able to go to?
Yes.
And confided in him?
Not all my life, no.
Not all of your life?
Not my entire life, no. We merged into this relationship that we have now. We've, it took us a while to get here. But by the time I was in my 20s, mid-20s maybe, we had more of an adult personal appreciation. I had more of an appreciation for him as a person, so we grew closer, yes, but it wasn't always like that. I didn't feel like I could talk to my dad growing up at all.
Okay, so you didn't feel like you could talk to him growing up. Can you be more specific about what you mean by growing up?
Anytime before the age of probably started opening up to him when I was about 22, 21.
22 or 21?
I didn't even swear in front of him for a long time.
You testified on direct that you confided in your dad about the assaults.
Yes.
And you testified that you didn't remember when you confided in him.
I did not sit down with my dad and illustrate for him what I experienced.
But you testified that you told your dad.
I had told my dad that the investigation that was conducted at YDC, that I had lied to them, and it was true. And I had told him that, and he was very upset, very upset. And no, it wasn't something that I didn't talk about a lot of things in my life for a very long time.
Okay, but you told him enough that you said that your dad was upset.
Yes.
But at that time, neither you nor your dad reported it to law enforcement.
Correct. I hadn't told my dad for a long time after it had happened.
Investigators spoke with you in July of 2020, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And one of the things they asked you was whether you had told anyone. Right?
Yes.
And at some point, you did tell them that your dad knew.
Yes, because the comment that that I had made to him, that I said it, do you remember the investigation in YDC, in YDSU? Sorry. And obviously he remembered. And I said, those things did happen. And he was very upset over the fact that when he would come to visit, there was some interactions between Victor and my father, and it was all very buddy-buddy, just, my dad really had a completely different impression of who Victor was portraying to him.
During that conversation, you were asked if the investigators could reach out to your dad to confirm. Right?
Okay, I don't remember, but if that's what it says, then.
You told them that you wanted to give him a heads up.
About letting him know that there was an open investigation on the sexual assaults. Yes, I did tell him that.
You said that you wanted to let him know before the officer spoke with him.
Out of respect for having him hear it from me, that this is what's going on in my life. This is what's happening now, and I just want you to be aware of what's happening, that I have spoken to the state police and I have spoken with my private attorney.
I understand that you have an explanation, but I just want to be very clear. You essentially asked them to wait until you had a chance to speak with them.
Who?
The officers that you spoke to speak with your dad.
About what?
About the assaults that we're talking about.
No. Can you show me where it says that?
Okay. So, do you want to go back to see that you're definitely talking about Dad?
No, it's okay.
Okay. So the officer asks, "Are you okay if we call him?" And you said, "I don't know if he would be okay." And the attorney says, "Okay." And you say, "I would have to give him a heads up."
Terminology for, my family is not the type where you just show up and visit, or they like phone calls. They don't like surprises. They like to know what's, so that they're not, I don't know, they just don't respond well to surprises, my gram, everybody.
Okay. I understand the explanation, but you wanted to give him a heads up before they spoke with him.
Just about a phone call, that the fact that they were calling, not about anything, about just specifics. I didn't even tell my dad specifically everything in detail what I have told everybody here today until just last week, a week and a half. He didn't know anything about anything.
Okay. I understand that you have an explanation, but you did essentially ask the officers to let you give him a heads up before they spoke with him. I know those aren't the exact words you used. We went over the words, and I understand you have an explanation.
So in the context, I can see how it's a heads up could sound like a warning for something, but that I don't have intentions to manipulate any truth.
Okay.
So
I'm not asking about your intentions. I'm just asking that is accurate what you said.
Yes, that's the way I said it, yeah.
Kelly, it's imperative for the defense during this cross to bring question to her testimony. I think they're doing a decent job. What are you thinking so far? Are you buying the stories that she's telling?
I am buying it because the way she's coming across, even when she's talking with defense counsel, she doesn't appear as if she's getting frustrated or flustered, which can easily happen to someone when they're on the witness stand, when they're being examined like this, cross-examined. But no, I find her story very believable.
Yeah, I would have to agree. It's sort of the way she's laying it out. It seems very credible to me. Let's bring in our guest with us, trial attorney Lateef Gray this hour. Lateef, first of all, I want to get your thoughts on her credibility, but also, how is the defense doing here with their cross?
The defense is doing pretty well with their cross. They're bringing out little statements she's made to try to impeach her. So they're doing a pretty good job under the circumstances. And as far as her credibility, I believe her. I mean, she doesn't appear to be embellishing anything. She doesn't appear to be adding any extras to it. So I think she's very credible.
Lateef, what do you make of defense counsel telling her or asking her about why she didn't bring this up to the ombudsman? So they have a lot of ombudsmen in a lot of these facilities that people can go to, an independent person they're supposed to maybe share confidential information with so they can kind of oversee and make sure things aren't awry. But here, the victim, the alleged victim in this case, she was not forthcoming. What do you make of that? How do you think the jurors are going to react to that?
Well, I think it's a logical area of inquiry for the defense. I mean, they are trying to create doubts as to her honesty and veracity. So I think it's a ripe area for them to go into. But I think having been involved in these types of cases, I'm sure the prosecutor is going to have some sort of expert who can justify or explain why, as a young victim, she didn't necessarily disclose this information to the powers that be within this facility. So it's a good area of questioning for the defense, but I also think that the prosecution will provide some expert testimony to explain away why she didn't do what most people would assume should be done in a situation like this.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because when we look at the statute of limitations, right, in New Hampshire, it's for a sexual assault like this, it's 6 years. But if the victim is under 18, they give them 22 years after their 18th birthday. Now we know this victim is 39. That means at 40 next year she would have run out of time. But at the end of the day, there's a reason for that. We've learned over the years, Lateef, that it's not that uncommon for these types of victims to not want to talk about these things. Now, add in the fact that she was a teen, that even makes it more understandable why perhaps her communication wasn't where one would have expected it to be and why the courts allow cases like this to come up 22 years later.
Precisely, and I'm sure that the prosecution's expert will explain that. Will explain that young victims are loath to tell the truth about what happened in situations like these for a variety of reasons, including embarrassment, including wanting to forget about the incident, and including trying to protect their victimizer. So I'm sure the expert testimony will explain away a lot of these details as to why she didn't necessarily come forward and be honest around the time this happened.
Yeah, no doubt about it. All right, Lateef, stand by. We're gonna